Hey there. Welcome back to United Taste of America, the podcast series from iHeart Podcast with a focus on the culinary history of America presented state by state. I'm Rick K. Jones, your host and guide to the best of the best foods across America as part of our country's 250th birthday this year. So happy birthday, America, 2026. We're going to be talking a lot about that all year. Today we're focused on the state of Maryland, the seventh state in the Union, Maryland, my Maryland. Maryland is another one of the 13 original colonies, and it's a very interesting colony. It was first settled in 1634 with a land grant from King Charles I to Sir George Calvert. Now, what's unusual? Remember when Henry VIII came in, did away with Catholicism, formed basically the Anglican Church so he could divorce and remarry. The Pope wasn't going to let him, so he said, to heck with it, I'll create my own religion. Well, during that period, they started persecuting Catholics. A lot of people didn't convert. England had been a Catholic country for decades, generations. And George Calvert was a Catholic. But he was a friend with the king. King Charles I, and so he was given this land grant, and then unfortunately George Calvert died, but the land grant reverted to his son Cecilius, and when they established the colony of Maryland, it was established as a Roman Catholic colony, which was unusual. Remember, we've talked earlier about some of the, Massachusetts being Puritans, Pilgrims, very conservative Protestants. Just south, now we have a Catholic colony in Maryland. Who Maryland is named for has never been determined. Some people think it was named for the Virgin Mary, which makes a lot of sense if you're forming a Catholic colony. But remember, the wife of King Charles I, her name was Mary. And so maybe it was named for her in honor of the land grant. It's been debated, but no one actually knows for sure. Now, if somebody out there says, hey, I know, let me know. Then I can tell the truth. But everything I've read, they don't really know why Maryland is called Maryland. All right, who were these Catholics largely? The first wave, again, we talked about them being persecuted. A lot of them had been thrown in prison. Now, in many cases, when we talk about prisoners, it's not axe murderers and thieves. It was people that couldn't pay their debts. So they go to a debtor's prison, which I always found to be kind of interesting. How the hell do you pay your debts off if you're in prison? I mean, it's like, really? I mean, at that point, let them go to work, pay their debts off. Maybe take their money, but don't lock them up. But anyway, I guess they figure it out. They're going to send them to Maryland now to earn their keep. And in many cases, these people were called what? Indentured servants. Indentured meaning I owe debts. And once I pay the debts off, I'm free of the debts, and now I can be a freedman. And so a lot of them came to the Maryland area. Maryland really is kind of two states. It's the coastal state. We'll talk a lot about this, what we call the Eastern Shore or the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. And that's very much an agricultural area. It's very much a seafood area. It's driven by the water, shipping, shipbuilding, commerce, all those kinds of things. Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, tobacco. Maryland was a slave state. Didn't take long for those Catholics to get to Maryland and start bringing in slaves, African slaves, to work and till the land. And Maryland, like Virginia, not far from Maryland, was a huge tobacco planting colony. Tobacco was in such demand in England and other parts of the world that it became really, really the cash crop for that. All built on what? The backs of enslaved people from the African diaspora that were brought there against their will. Here's a fun fact about Maryland. They actually started horse racing there in our country. We'll talk about Kentucky in a few weeks, and the great horse racing industry in Kentucky. But originally, horse racing started with the planters around the Maryland area, and they created a really great race called the Preakness. And you know the Preakness today is the second leg of the three-race Triple Crown, Kentucky Derby, Preakness, Belmont. The Preakness is a racetrack outside of Baltimore where they started there, and it today is a famous race for three-year-old thoroughbreds. At the Preakness, we know about the Derby. They run for the Roses. What do they run for at the Preakness? Black-eyed Susans. Black-eyed Susans, native flower of Maryland. They make basically a blanket of those flowers that they put around the winning horse. The Chesapeake Bay, as I mentioned, is so essential to the economy of Maryland. It's played a huge role in not only the economy, but the whole lifestyle of Maryland. Originally, again, these Catholics, largely Catholics, were appreciative of the fact that they were given the colony by the king. And so they were not really high on leaving the crown. They were not big on wanting to form the United States of America, but they finally came around. And part of what they came around was, remember that a lot of the troops that came from both Germany and from England to fight came in through the Chesapeake Bay. And so they caused a lot of damage. And as they caused a lot of damage around places like Annapolis and other places, a lot of people that were pro-loyal, that were loyal to the crown, began to convert. And so they kind of created their own problem in Maryland. And ultimately, they, did like everybody else. They signed the Declaration of Independence and became part of the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War, unlike the War of 1812, which comes later, was largely not a naval war. And the reason it wasn't a naval war was we didn't have a Navy. It's hard in the United States to go fight a war with ships when you don't have a Navy. And we didn't have a Navy. Well, we had a Navy by 1812. And so the War of 1812, we'll talk about in a minute, was fought extensively throughout Maryland. So Maryland does leave the crown. They do sign the Declaration of Independence, and after the war, they become the seventh state in the Union. Okay, so, by the time the war ends at 1781, when we talked about Massachusetts last week, we talked about the fact that really what created the win for us was that we didn't lose the war, that General Washington didn't lose the war, and that we waited them out economically. And England had a very distressed economy around the 1780s and just finally said, we just can't fund this anymore. Well, by the time 1812 rolls around, their economy's better. And a bunch of their leaders say, damn it, we're going to go back and get it back. That's our colony. That's our place. We're coming back. And that led to the War of 1812. And the War of 1812, so much of it was fought in and around the Chesapeake Bay. You all know the famous story of our troops guarding the harbor in Baltimore. And the British sailed into Baltimore to burn Baltimore. Where had they been the week before? Anybody know? They'd been to Washington. We had built between 1781 and 1812, we had moved our capital, Philadelphia to New York, to Washington, D.C., to Washington, largely a compromise to the South. They wanted a Southern capital. They built it on swampland next to the Potomac River, not far from where George Washington home is in Mount Vernon. We'll talk about that when we talk about Virginia. They sailed up the Potomac and they burned the White House. They burned the White House. They ransacked Washington. They've got our government on the run, and they sailed to Baltimore. And we have a fort guarding the harbor called Fort McHenry. And there was a prisoner of war, an American who was on a British ship in the harbor. His name was Francis Scott Key. And he writes a poem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? It's our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. It's about the battle of the British bombing Fort McHenry, and the sun comes up in the morning, and he looks to see whose flag is flying on the fort, and our flag is still flying. We defeat the British. We keep them out of Baltimore. And that turned the tide, and obviously we won the War of 1812. When we talk about Louisiana later, we'll talk about the famous Battle of New Orleans, where Andy Jackson goes down and defeats the British. Here's one problem. The British had already surrendered before that battle. We fight that battle after the war's over, but we'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Maryland becomes really an industrial power after the War of 1812. Baltimore becomes a major, major, major city. It's a great port. You've got that huge Chesapeake Bay leading into the port of Baltimore. And a lot of industries, a lot of companies were formed in Baltimore. Maryland becomes probably the most important border state. Interesting, Maryland is a slave state, like we talked about Delaware being a slave state early on, that remained in the Union. But it becomes really the hub of what we call the Underground Railroad. Harry Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Tubman brought slaves from the South into Maryland for freedom in many cases. And so it was a big, big state on the Underground Railroad. And you understand it because if you know anything about the eastern shore of Maryland, it's wild. I mean, it's swampland and it's all kinds of creeks and lots of places to hide and places that you could bring people into. One of the most famous battles in the American Civil War was fought in Maryland at Antietam, Bull Run. That's in the state of Maryland, and that's where the Union won their first battle against Robert E. Lee and the Southern troops that led to the conclusion of the war. Today, Maryland is it is a very, very diverse state. It is really a bedroom community in many cases to Washington. So it's a state with a lot of government employees, a whole lot of military personnel that are based in a lot of the bases around Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, and all the other military establishments around the D.C. area. Maryland's also become a leader in data centers where they're storing data and other technology. Maryland is a beautiful state. It's the western part as you go out towards West Virginia, Harper's Ferry, that area, Frederick, Maryland is amazing. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where the famous war, the Civil War battle that really turned the war, is in Pennsylvania, but it's very, very close to the Maryland state line. And so Maryland was a critical state, again, in the Civil War and in the War of 1812. As many of y'all know, people that know me, and if you don't, you're going to find out now, I am a huge college basketball fan. I started my career as a college basketball coach 50 years ago at the University of the South in Sewanee. Here's something that a lot of people don't know about college basketball. Midnight Madness, which is very famous in college basketball, was created at the University of Maryland by Lefty, Charles Lefty Driesell. Driesell had been, he played at Duke, Duke graduate, had become the basketball coach at Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina, built a powerhouse there, and then got named as the head basketball coach at Maryland. At this time, UCLA is the dominant player in college basketball. John Wooden won 10 national championships in 12 years. Lefty called Maryland, self-proclaimed it, the UCLA of the East. Now, in that era, the first day of practice was October the 15th. No matter what day of the week October 15th fell on, that was the first day we could practice in college basketball. So Lefty had this idea, let's start practice at 12:01 a.m. on October the 15th. So he invited the fans to come out. They did a little inter-squad game, and he created Midnight Madness, which has become a tradition for so many schools where they practice that. Maryland also played another huge role in the NCAA tournament, in that in 1974, they were the number 2 team in the nation, ranked all year long behind NC State. NC State was the number 1 ranked team in the nation that year. And Maryland was number 2. In that era, only 1 team per conference went to the NCAA tournament, and Maryland lost to NC State in the finals of the ACC tournament to go to the NCAA tournament. They lost the game in double overtime, and they went home. They didn't get invited. That's when the committee realized, and the NCAA realized, we got to expand the tournament. You can't leave out the second best team in the country because they lost to the number 1 team in the country in their conference championship, and that led to the expansion of the tournament as we know it today. And so Maryland played such a huge role in the history of college basketball with the expansion of the NCAA tournament and with Midnight Madness. Our musical playlist today from Maryland is a really fun one. Our first song is Maryland, My Maryland. Again, that is the song that they play right before they run the famous Preakness race every year in Maryland. We have a song from Prince, who's one of my favorite artists, called Baltimore. We've got one from Ronnie Dove called Maryland Memories. We've got Raining in Baltimore from the Counting Crows. And then we have a song from my favorite female singer who was born and raised in Baltimore. Her name is Billie Holiday. It's the classic I Cover the Waterfront. I've got a buddy, Carl Thomas, who has another podcast that you ought to check out called The Best Boss Ever podcast series. It's great. He interviews people and they talk about who was the best boss they've ever had and what they learned from them. And one of the things he does with anybody that's a guest, and I've had the chance to be a guest on his show, he asks you 3 questions, and one of the questions is, who is your favorite female artist or lead singer in a band, female lead singer? And for me, when he asked me that, I answered Billie Holiday. Lady Day is my favorite female singer of all time, and again, she is from Baltimore. When you think of Maryland, what do you think of? Of course, you think of seafood, especially Chesapeake Bay blue crabs and oysters. They also harvest and catch fresh rockfish. In South Carolina, we don't call them rockfish. We call them striped bass. But in the Chesapeake Bay, it's the same species. They call it rockfish. Several years ago, I read a book that is one of my favorite books ever. It's a nonfiction book called Beautiful Swimmers. It was written by a guy named William Warner in 1976, and it actually won the Pulitzer Prize for general nonfiction in 1977. Beautiful Swimmers is the story of the seafood industry in Maryland. And it's all about the beautiful swimmers, which are the blue crabs. And the economy is driven so much by the blue crabs from the Chesapeake Bay. It's a wonderful book that tells you about, not only blue crabs, but how they harvested oysters and scallops and caught fish and all the things that led to the great seafood industry in the Chesapeake. The Chesapeake, like so many of our bodies of water, got polluted a few years ago, but it's come back. They've really cleaned it up. It's great. You can now pretty much eat anything that comes out of the Chesapeake Bay without fear of mercury poisoning or other kind of poisoning. Maryland's known for other things other than seafood. It's known for what we call a pit beef sandwich. Pit beef, it's a barbecued beef, basically, on a bun, especially around the Baltimore area, some of the great pit beef sandwich restaurants. There's another product, again, that is a seafood product called coddies. Coddies are, again, salted cod served with eggs, saltine crackers, and mashed potatoes, all put together in a big patty and pan fried. So you got a little bit of fish, got a little bit of egg, got a little bit of mashed potato, got a little saltine. Wonderful breakfast dish called a coddy. They're famous in Maryland for stuffed ham. It's baked ham that is stuffed with greens, onions, peppers, and spices. Stuffed ham from Maryland. Maryland's also known for some great desserts. In the Chesapeake Bay is a place called Smith Island. And several years ago, or several decades ago, the women started making a very famous 10-layer cake called a Smith Island cake. 10 thin layers of buttery cake with chocolate fudge filling between each layer and then a chocolate fudge icing. Smith Island cake, really, really good. They're also famous in Maryland for a thing called Burger's cookies. These are a cookie made, it's really a soft cake cookie covered in chocolate icing, Burger's cookies. Another famous dessert in Maryland are called lemon sticks. They're like lemon squares with sugar, but they give you a hollowed out peppermint stick. And you stick the peppermint stick into the lemon square and you do this. And you suck that lemon combination with a straw, with the famous peppermint taste. So that peppermint lemon combination is really good. They also have a very famous peach sheet cake called a smear case cake that's made with cottage cheese and fresh peaches. They're famous for some snack foods in Maryland. There's a thing called Fisher's Caramel Popcorn down at the beach at Ocean City. And another famous dish down in Ocean City are the famous Thrasher's French fries. These are fries that are fried twice. They fry them, get them nice and soft on the inside, and then hit them with a little bit more heat and get them nice and crunchy and salty and good. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. Thrasher's French fries, Ocean City, Maryland. But as I mentioned when we talked about the Chesapeake Bay and the book Beautiful Swimmers, the most important dish, the most important seafood that dominates so many dishes in Maryland is the crab, the blue crab. I live in South Carolina on a tidal river on Wadmalaw Island, and I catch a lot of blue crabs off my dock, and I love blue crabs. In Maryland, they serve them everywhere you can think of. Steamed crabs in Old Bay. They give you a mallet, you beat on it, pick them, eat them, fabulous. Soft shell crabs. Soft shell crabs really are kind of the early crabs come out of the mud. They start growing. Their shell's too small. They molt. They're very vulnerable during that period of time. So when you pull one out of the crab trap and you realize it's about to molt, you put it separate in a separate place, because if you don't, the other crabs, they eat it because they lose their shell, they lose their pinchers. Soft shell crabs are some of my very favorite, sauteed, pan-fried. I love soft shell crabs. Crab dip, cream of crab soup, Maryland crab soup, which is Cream of crab is made with milk. Maryland crab is made with tomato base, no dairy product. Crab imperial is one of my favorite dishes. It's a casserole of lump crab meat with an imperial sauce. You make imperial sauce with mayonnaise, egg yolks, and seasoning. Again, it's baked. Crab imperial, boy, it's good, good, good. Toast points. You want to make some toast and take it out and put it on the toast and eat the imperial. Really, really good. Lots of these dishes, including crab imperial, use this thing called Old Bay seasoning. Old Bay was actually created in 1939 by a German immigrant named Gustav Braun in Baltimore. It has become, probably the iconic spice of Maryland and one of the most popular spices around the world. Old Bay used for a lot of crab dishes in Maryland. But if you want to pick one crab dish that really says Maryland, it's the crab cake. It's the crab cake. In so many places so many famous places make crab cakes all over the state of Maryland. They're all different. Now, you get crab cakes in other states, you get a donut. You get a whole bunch of dough, and maybe you'll find one piece of crab in it. That's not a crab cake. Crab cakes are all crab. And maybe there's a little bit of binder like saltine crackers or something that holds it together, but it's mostly crab. And the most famous crab cake of all, in my opinion, in the state of Maryland is the jumbo lump crab cakes from Fadley's in the Lexington market in Baltimore. These are softball size crab cakes. I mean, they're enormous. One is a meal. I mean, an entire meal. They are amazing. Fadley's, we'll talk about in a minute, it's been around for a long, long time. But the matriarch of Fadley's is a woman named Nancy Fadley Devine, and we call her the queen of crab cakes. Nancy actually invented this giant jumbo lump crab cakes. First of all, they are made only with lump crab meat. Now, you got to understand something about the crab. There are two kinds of crabs. The male crab is called a jimmy, and they're big. A female crab are smaller, and they're called sookies. When we talk about South Carolina, we're going to talk about a dish called she crab soup. That's made with female crab meat because you want the roe of the eggs. Maryland crab cakes are largely made from jimmies, and Fadley's only uses lump crab meat, and the lump is only found in two places in the back fin. They're big pieces of meat on both sides of basically the tail of the crab, the male crab. And so to make these, you gotta have a lot of crabs because you're not using any other of the crab meat from the body or any from the claws. You're using only lump crab meat, which is the sweetest, best part of the crab. So it's a back fin only crab meat. She adds saltine crackers, mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, Worcestershire sauce, a beaten egg, and Old Bay. How much of those? It's a secret. She's not going to tell you. But that's the deal. So go home and play with it sometime. Again, crab meat, saltine crackers, mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, Worcestershire sauce, beaten eggs, and Old Bay. Here's another fun fact. Premium saltines, which are made by Nabisco, which in my humble opinion are the best saltine crackers, where were they manufactured? Baltimore. So those crackers were originally to Baltimore. And so cracker meal is so important to great crab cakes, again, made right there in Baltimore. All right, so what does she do? She puts them all together, and then she fries them. She doesn't grill them or broil them. She fries them, and then they come out of the fryer, and you take a fresh lemon, and you squeeze the lemon on top of that crab cake, and then you eat it. I spent a day with Nancy. What a dear. What a great person with amazing sense of humor. She told me so many wonderful stories about her family, and she showed me how to make these delicious crab cakes. Her daughter, Damie Hahn, hosted us. We had a marvelous time filming there, filming the Maryland segment. And Nancy started using the lump crab meat to create these beauties back in the 1980s. And they ship them. If you're not going to Baltimore, you can order them from Faley's. They'll send them to you, and you can have them on there. Again, I mentioned I live on a tidal river, and we catch fresh crabs regularly, and I make my own crab cakes. Mine are good. Trust me. I make really good crab cakes. Faley's are great. There's a difference. Good, great. These are great. In fact, they're the best crab cakes I've ever eaten. You can, get them fresh in Baltimore, as I mentioned. You can order them from their mail order catalog or order them from Goldbelly, who carries them. This is a bucket list dish everyone should try once in their lifetime. The problem is if you try it once in your lifetime, you're going to want to eat them again and again and again. Again, Faley's is a great American success story. It was founded in 1886 by John W. Faley in Baltimore in a tiny seafood stall there in the Lexington Market. They've been there in both the old market, which is next door, and now the new market since that time, since 1886. 4 generations own it, but the 5th and 6th generation actually work there, which is pretty cool to have generations working in the business. It's a really cool, fun place. There are no tables. You come into the market, there's stands where you can set up. You can stand up at a stall and eat, but there's no place to sit because they want you to get in, get out, and it's the perfect lunch, kind of a business lunch from that standpoint. They got amazing food. In addition to the famous crab cakes, they serve terrific soups, seafood platters, great coleslaw, great potato salad, among other sides. Don't miss it on your next trip to Baltimore. Crab cakes, jumbo lump crab cakes, Faley's, Lexington Market, Baltimore, Maryland. All right, you can't still be hungry, can you? I mean, you've eaten all these crab cakes today. But in case you are, here are 3 more wonderful restaurants from Maryland that are 3 from me. One of my favorite places to visit, again, as I told you, is the Maryland Eastern Shore. And there's a wonderful teeny little town on the Eastern Shore called St. Michael's. Again, Catholic parishes. This was a Catholic parish called St. Michael's, little tiny fishing community. They have a wonderful resort there, one of the best resorts in America, called the Inn at Perry Cabin. Okay? If you have the money, if you have the time, this is one of the greatest places to stay, the Inn at Perry Cabin. But if you can't stay there, you got to eat there because they have a wonderful restaurant called Stars Restaurant in the Inn at Perry Cabin on the Maryland Eastern Shore. You want to get the rockfish, the basically grilled or baked striped bass. They stuff it with crab meat, and then they broil it or bake it or grill it the way you want it. It's unbelievable. They have all kinds of other great foods there. It's just one of the great restaurants in America, Stars Restaurant, the Inn at Perry Cabin in St. Michael's on the Eastern Shore. The second restaurant, it's got a great name. It's called the Suicide Bridge Restaurant. It's in Hurlock, Maryland, again on the Chesapeake Bay. I'm not sure why they call it. I don't think they call it Suicide Bridge because people have committed suicides. It just for years was a very rickety bridge that you felt like you might be committing suicide driving across that bridge. And right next to that bridge is this amazing restaurant. You want to start with, steamed crabs, with Old Bay. Eat them till you can't eat anymore, then order your real entree. all kinds of great seafood. It's one of my favorite places. The third restaurant is in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Chevy Chase, Maryland is a suburb of Washington, D.C. In fact, the Washington, D.C. line is right at Chevy Chase. So it's not far for those that live and work in Washington. This restaurant is called La Ferme. It is a very famous French restaurant, and it was Nancy Reagan's favorite restaurant. When Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan were the 8 years they served as president and first lady of the United States, this was her favorite place, and they went there on a regular basis. It is a classic French restaurant with classic chicken dishes. Now, they don't use the chicken that we buy. They use, heirloom chickens that are roasted and cooked in a variety of ways, served, in classic French style, all kinds of other French foods. This is, again, a bucket list restaurant for you, La Ferme. So Stars Restaurant at the Inn and Perry Cabin, Suicide Bridge Restaurant, and La Ferme. All right, I got to give you one more. I got to give you a little bonus one today. We talked about pit beef, and I love pit beef, and there are a lot of great places, but my favorite is a place called Chaps. Chaps Pit Beef. It's been there forever, right outside of Baltimore. Killer pit beef sandwich. So I gave you a little bonus today. 4 restaurants from the great state of Maryland. And that's our show from Maryland, a state with multiple iconic dishes. We hope to see you back here next week on United Taste of America with state number 8. And why is that one important? That's where I live. That's my home state, South Carolina. We'll see you then.